For centuries, the corset has shaped not only the human figure, but also the ideals of beauty, power, and status. It has been a symbol of refinement, a tool of discipline, and at times, a source of controversy. Worn by queens, socialites, and everyday women alike, it dictated fashion and reinforced cultural expectations. Yet, as society evolved, so too did attitudes toward this rigid garment. It has been celebrated, condemned, and revived in ways few other garments have. Was it an instrument of oppression or a masterpiece of craftsmanship? And ultimately, what led to the rise and fall of the corset? To find the answers, we must journey back to the Renaissance, where its story begins, right here on History of Simple Things. The earliest forms of corsetry emerged in the 16th century, a time when European nobility sought to mold the human silhouette into idealized shapes. These early corsets, or stays, were rigid, structured with materials like whalebone and wood, designed to flatten the bust and emphasize a smooth, elongated torso. It was not merely a fashion statement, it was a declaration of status. Clothing at the time reflected social standing, and a well-fitted corset signified wealth and propriety. It was in the court of Catherine de' Medici, the influential Queen of France, that the corset took on a particularly defining role. She reportedly banned women with thick waists from her court, cementing the corset as an essential component of aristocratic fashion. As the centuries progressed, the corset evolved in both form and function. By the 18th century, it became a standard garment for women across different social classes, though the materials and embellishments varied depending on wealth. The design emphasized a conical shape, with laces that cinched the waist while lifting and supporting the bust. More than an aesthetic tool, it was seen as a necessity for posture, poise, and femininity. Yet this was also the period when criticism of corsetry began to emerge. Physicians voiced concerns about its effects on health. Restricted breathing, displaced organs, and even fainting spells became associated with tight lacing. Still, the desire to conform to the prevailing standards of beauty kept the corset firmly in place. The Victorian era, arguably the corset's golden age, witnessed its most dramatic transformation. The hourglass figure, a small waist, accentuated bust, and full hips, became the ultimate ideal of beauty. Corsets were engineered with extreme precision, sometimes laced so tightly that they reduced waists to unnaturally small measurements. Women of all social standings embraced them, reinforcing their role as an inescapable part of daily attire. However, the corset was no longer just a tool for aesthetics. It became a symbol of morality and virtue. A properly corseted woman was considered disciplined, modest, and respectable. Even in the medical field, doctors prescribed corsets for posture correction, ignoring the growing evidence of their adverse health effects. The pressure to maintain the ideal figure led to extreme practices, such as tight-lacing, where young girls were trained from adolescence to shrink their waists over time. But as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, winds of change began to stir. The suffragette movement, advocating for women's rights and independence, saw the corset as a physical and metaphorical shackle. Feminists argued that it restricted not only the body, but also the freedom and potential of women. Science also turned against the corset, with medical studies linking it to respiratory issues, digestive problems, and even weakened muscles. The shift in attitudes coincided with changing lifestyles. Women were no longer just confined to domestic spheres, but were engaging in sports, work, and more active roles in society. With increased mobility came a need for less restrictive clothing. By the early 1900s, designers like Paul Poiret and Coco Chanel began rejecting the corset in favor of looser, flowing garments that allowed for movement and comfort. The final blow to the dominance of the corset came with the outbreak of World War I. As women took on roles in factories, hospitals, and offices, practicality replaced the rigid demands of fashion. Corsetry, which had already begun to loosen its grip, was now actively discouraged. Steel, previously used for corset boning, was redirected for military purposes, and women found themselves liberated, at least sartorially. By the 1920s, the flapper era had arrived, celebrating androgynous silhouettes that completely defied the hourglass figure. Corsets were cast aside in favor of softer, less structured undergarments. The freedom of movement became a powerful statement, reflecting the changing tides of gender norms and modernity. Though the corset fell from mainstream fashion, it never truly disappeared. It lingered in the undergarments of the 1950s, reimagined as the girdle, a less restrictive but still structured alternative. The corset also found new life in the world of fetish fashion, performance art, and alternative subcultures. Designers such as Vivienne Westwood and Jean-Paul Gaultier revived the corset as an artistic statement, no longer a tool of societal constraint, but a declaration of personal power and rebellion. In music and pop culture, icons like Madonna used the corset to challenge traditional notions of femininity, transforming it into a symbol of confidence rather than confinement. Today, the corset exists in multiple forms, from haute couture to waist-training trends on social media. While some embrace it as a historical fashion piece or a method of body sculpting, others view it as a relic of an era that sought to control and define women's bodies. The debate over its place in history continues, raising questions about beauty standards, agency, and the evolution of fashion. Unlike in the past, however, wearing a corset today is largely a choice rather than a societal expectation. And that choice reflects a shift, not just in fashion, but in the way individuals reclaim and redefine traditions once imposed upon them. The rise and fall of the corset is a tale of beauty and restriction, of power and rebellion. It shaped generations, dictated ideals, and later became a canvas for artistic and cultural reinvention. Though no longer a necessity, its influence lingers in fashion, from the cinched waists of mid-century Hollywood to the structured silhouettes of modern couture. Once a symbol of conformity, today it serves as a choice, embraced for artistry rather than obligation. Its transformation over the centuries speaks to the enduring power of fashion, not only as a reflection of society, but also as an agent of change. The corset story is not just about fabric and boning, it is about the shifting tides of culture, reminding us that what was once restrictive can be reclaimed, repurposed, and reimagined as a statement of strength and self-expression. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.